Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Jeff Richard, who is the creative director of Chaosium, and we talked about running RuneQuest combats. When you're new to RuneQuest, or maybe you're picking it up after a little while, it sometimes takes a moment or two to swap back into the mindset of running engaging and exciting combat, the sort of stuff that RuneQuest is famous for. So Jeff here gives some basic advice and talks through some of the details that should be useful to all kinds of GMs when they jump into their first RuneQuest combat ever or in a little while. I'll jump across the interview in just a moment, but first, please remember to subscribe, and thanks for watching.
So normally when I'm running a game, there's two types of first combats that I'll throw in. I'll usually, if it's a new group of players, I'll do a combat relatively early in the session, and it's usually of something like a saber-toothed tiger or some sort of wild beast or a big angry bear. And the reason being there is you want to teach your fellow players and yourself the ropes of the rules and how to interact with the mechanics of the game without putting the players in a position where they're going to have, if they do something dopey, they're screwed. So, this is the another one to do is if you're doing a game in the big rubble in Pavis, you have rubble runners, and if people who played MMORPGs can remember, you used to have rat quests at the beginning of a game. And the reason you had those is they weren't very tough and they gave you experience, but they were really super tedious. I prefer to have something come in like a bear or a saber-tooth tiger or an angry drunk warrior. That's something that the players should be able to handle, but it gives us a stage for us to then walk things through and show the players how to handle combat. And that's basically the tutorial.
So, can you talk us through, as if you are talking to a completely new player, maybe somebody who understands the core kind of BRP style skill roles of RuneQuest, but doesn't really understand the combat? Can you give them a brief description of how it works?
Okay, so there's basically 4 or 5 moving pieces in combat that we refer to all the time. First is you look at your character sheet and, hey, what's my chance to hit? And that's going to be expressed as a percentile number on this. And look down your character sheet, and usually if you're usually look at whatever one you're best at, and use that because that's what you got your best chance of doing that. The next really key number is strike rank, and that's the initiative, basically a way of determining initiative and determining who acts first. And unlike in many games where what you do is you roll a number and you add your dex to it, or you just look at your dex, in RuneQuest, the length of your weapon and your own personal length matters. So if I'm using a spear, then against somebody using a dagger, if everything else is the same, I'm going to strike first. Keep track of your strike rank. Now, the nice thing is that it only is going to change if I change what I'm doing. So it's actually easy to keep track of. And then the other big one to be looking at is how much damage do I do if I hit? All right. And that's so relatively easy things here. So then on the flip side, what matters is what is the armor points of whatever I'm trying to parry with? Do I wear any armor? Because that provides another armor points. And then, oh my gosh, if I get hit and it gets through all my armor, how many hit points do I have in that location? And that's one of the neat things in RuneQuest is that your hit points have an individual hit location. So, you can do stuff like do that aimed blow to the head of the enemy that's otherwise too tough for you. Or you can look for, hey, what kind of armor is this person wearing? Oh, I'm going to do an aimed shot for their leg. It allows you to have that kind of fencing interactive combat strategy it's a lot of fun in that. And then the final thing to throw in is does my character have some magic that might be appropriate in this combat, and do I want to cast it? And these are the things to just as if I'm a player or a GM, these are the things that I want to keep in mind. And so the first combat, the way to keep it simple is reduce the number of foes so that at most you have one foe per player character. And the idea is that way everybody has something to do. You might even go less than that. And the idea there is that teaches the players and you how to run this. And as you get more experienced with this and more comfortable with running combats, then you can start doing more complex things with lots of foes. You can start having the NPCs use cool magic as a big surprise to the players, going, oh, whoa, wait, what do you mean they can cast combat affecting spells? But just build it up. Now, one of the big differences that RuneQuest and all BRP systems have that's different than some other role-playing games is that encounters aren't set up to be based around your skill ability or your general combat worthiness. If you're dumb enough to decide that you want to hunt down and fight a dinosaur, then it really doesn't matter, then you're going to get what you called down on. And what really is the key is make sure that you as the GM don't throw so many things onto this so that the combat becomes instead of something an exciting skirmish, it turns into this tedious grind. But that's the same advice I would give on any rule system.
So let's break down each of those points individually. You've talked about sort of the skills and the weapons. You've talked about strike rank. You've talked about armor and damage, and you've talked about adding magic. I want to hit you with a couple of like beginner FAQs. These are things that I ran into when I was learning RuneQuest and that I've heard about. So let's start with skills. When you look down, you've got your list of skills. Should you be expecting to be primarily using one weapon, or should you be expecting to kind of change out weapons a little bit?
It depends on what you want to play. Usually when I have so if you're trying to shoot for becoming a rune lord, and a rune lord is, that's your warrior magician, that the most, generally speaking, the most dangerous characters around there, followers of Orlanth or Humacht or Yomalio or Stormbull or whatever. Then in order to be that rune lord, you usually have to be a master of several weapons. And in order to do that, you're either going to have to train and spend an awful lot of time training, or you're going to have to try to get yourself into a position where you're capable of, through experience, becoming the master of several weapons. So, if that's my goal, then I'm probably going to want to play around and experiment. And because the god doesn't care that you're 95% at sword, if that's the only weapon that you're 95% at, you're not going to make Rune Lord.
Your skill with your literal weapon is the only thing that factors in, because you've also got a skill in dodge and you've got a skill in potentially, parrying with a shield or stuff like that.
And you've got something else. You've got the ability to do an augment. So if this combat, you say, this combat here, I'm doing this because I am defending the love of my life, then your love passion for the love of your life is something that you can use to give yourself a bonus. Or I'm doing this because I am the sworn warrior of Prince Argrath. And Prince Argrath, if I lose this fight, my prince is in danger. I'm going to roll against my passion. It can also even work for runes. If this is the magical enemy of my god, and my god is the storm god, and I'm fighting against these enemies of my god, well, maybe it'd be appropriate to roll against my air rune rating or something else. But the point, or the most common one I see all the time with some characters is, hey, this is an honorable fight. Honor is at stake here. I'm going to roll against my my honor passion, and I'm going to see if I get a bonus there. So you've got this ability to get this neat rewarding you for role playing bonus to one of your skills in the combat.
Let's talk about strike rank a little bit. Here's a couple of questions. When you start a fight and everyone's weirdly positioned, and maybe some of them have weapons in their hands, some of them don't, what's the common thing? Is it best to just assume everybody rushes and gets into contact? Is it best to assume that everybody has time to pull out their weapon and get into it? How do you deal with that?
With experienced RuneQuest players, what I always see before a fight is they try to spend time before the fight essentially amping themselves up, casting magic on themselves, trying to prep for it. Now it lets their enemies do this. And if you can imagine this in the ancient world, this is like when the champions would go up and they would yell at each other and mock each other and call on their gods and make all sorts of crazy crazy boasts to build up their willingness to go and enter into a fight. And it's a really and that's actually the smartest thing in general to do if you think you're about to have a fight, is try to amp yourself up. Now the flip side is usually it means that your opponents are doing exactly the same, and then whoever is done first tries to charge in to the fight. So that's something you see a lot. The other one you see an awful lot in RuneQuest is, they don't see us, they're not ready. Let's ambush them. But there's a problem with doing an ambush, which is it's dishonorable. So if you're playing the characters that have those high honor, and are used to getting that nice bonus and an augment because they fight honorably, now they're at a disadvantage because they're, this is dishonorable. I'm actually gonna lose points in my honor if I do this, but tactically it's the smartest thing you can do. And so you get, in a lot of RuneQuest combats, you get people that are willing to do things that don't necessarily make power gamey sense in order to preserve the passions and the psychology of their character that is frankly often has a lot of really big game rewards if they keep that up.
When you are taking damage, I often find it's useful to know things like the special damage for certain types of weapons, like slashing, weapons and things like that. What is some of the key info that you will keep ready to hand? I know that you've memorized it a lot, but what are some of the key tools that you would keep?
I actually use the GM screen, for any game. And I wrote half the rules in this, but I like to have stuff down. I like to know the key things that I always like to keep in mind is I like to know for all of the NPCs, what is their strike rank, right? That's super important. And I just jot those down on a sheet of paper and I try to stick to that. I don't try to have too much variation of the strike rank I tend to use. We'll have Hrothgar the Red, the fearsome warrior of the Colbrea tribe, but actually Hrothgar the Red, who we've created all this personality for, it's good warrior number 3 off my little chart of good warriors. I try to keep the paperwork to a minimum on this. You can always create a unique and interesting NPC through how that NPC interacts with the players, as opposed to trying to stat that all up. Another thing I do is I try to remember, impaling weapons. If they get an impale, it's going to get stuck, and that's cool. Slashing weapons, does extra damage. And crushing weapons, I try to remember that, crushing weapons are best if we're dealing with something really strong, like a big troll or a giant, and then they're terrifying. Another tactic that I see a lot that works really well in RuneQuest is everybody preps up, you keep your little bit of distance away from the enemy. Everybody preps up, and then you shower the enemy with missile weapons and magic and soften them up. And then once you've thrown your javelins or fired your thunderbolts or lightning or whatever, then the players tend to charge in, and with any luck, they've taken down a foe or two, or at least badly weakened a couple of them. But be willing in combat, if you're a player, soften that foe up. And if it doesn't look like you've done any damage to them at all, and your javelins bounced off their armor, and your befuddles and demoralized spells failed to work, there is no shame in running away.
With magic, I think that sometimes people jump into a fight and they're a little cautious to use their magic. Perhaps they've been playing a lot of systems where you only get a couple of spells, whereas in RuneQuest, because spirit magic regenerates quite quickly, it's almost an expectation that you use some magic.
Oh yeah, every fight, use that spirit magic. If you've got Blade Sharp 4, cast Blade Sharp 4 on your sword. It adds 20% to your chance to hit. Remember, this is a percentile system, so that's a big deal. And it increases your damage by 4. If I'm playing a warrior, there are basically 3 spells I want to get as quickly as possible. I want as many points of Blade Sharp as I can get. I want to get protection, because protection adds armor points. And I want to get Demoralize. Demoralize is a wonderful spell. And what Demoralize does is it demoralize your foe. They don't want to advance. They're not going to necessarily run away, but they're not going to advance on you. And they're going to largely act defensively. And then, if they're demoralized, focus on somebody else. If you manage to kill a couple of the demoralized, or take down a couple of the demoralized person's friends or allies, if I'm running as a GM, I'm probably going to have them run away, because when I'm a GM, I very rarely think that the NPCs, the player's enemies, are going to fight to the death in every situation. When a skirmish goes bad for your side, unless they've got some extraordinary reason to do otherwise, run away, let them survive. And that, of course, creates more problems for the players, because, hey, we did great on this because we blew our spirit magic here. And now they've run away and our spirit magic's over, and now we're not as tough as we were. So I realized you were asking about spirit magic, and I just was going into general tactics altogether, but cast that spirit magic. And if, spirit magic is a place where your character, those characters that aren't combat machines, can be heavily involved. You've got that Ernalda cultist. She has Befuddle. Cast Befuddle. You've got, maybe she's got a healing spell. Well, gosh, healing is being able to cast healing in a combat makes the difference between victory and total party wipeout, and it doesn't necessarily require that many points to make a huge difference.
RuneQuest combat is visceral, and it is exciting, and it's a ton of fun to jump into, but it's almost a certainty whenever you jump into a system for the first time that you're going to get a few of the details wrong. What do you do if you get into some RuneQuest combat and you realize, hey, I didn't get that quite right, or I've missed this, or I'm actually not so familiar with this rule and I'm not sure what I do right now?
Okay, so, and this happens a lot in any game system, is what do you do in the situation where a player, because a rule was misunderstood, ended up with a combat result other than what the rules would have dictated? Now, my general rule is, if the player survived the combat that they shouldn't have because we misunderstood a rule, you let them survive the combat. You go to the player's benefit. If, on the other hand, what happened is the player is killed or something horrible happens to them, then you realize in a reasonable amount of time that, that shouldn't have happened. We totally spaced that Grodnar has 6 armor points on their head. Grodnar's, not dead, shouldn't be dead, but should only be unconscious or only taking a flesh wound. Then what I do, if I've got the chance, I just restore the character to where they should have been. If we realize this 3 hours later, and Grodnar's still dead, then it kind of, it's not fun for everybody else to have to relive the combat. So, depending on what happens, it could be, well, we thought Grodnar was dead, but actually, Grodnar's in a bad shape here, wakes up with a terrible headache, but is still alive, like you would do you see in a film or in a book or a series. Something bad happened to the player, to the character. We try to mitigate it somewhat and just roll with this, because at the end of the day, the rules aren't computer code. They're not this system that is designed that we have to follow the rules perfectly in order to have a good time. The rules are here as a series of guidelines to help us understand how to adjudicate things going on with a game in a way that's fun. So if you screwed up, if something bad happened to the party because you got a rule wrong, find a way to mitigate that.